Hi, my name is Jonathan Hus, and before I begin, I would like to thank the organizers for allowing me to present my research at this year's conference. Today, I'll be presenting my work on a nanocrystalline silver layer of knitted polyester that outperforms other silver-containing wound dressings in an in vitro model. I do not have anything to disclose. Silver has been used for its cytotoxic effects on fungi, bacteria, and other viral microbes for thousands of years. For example, it dates back to Egypt in around 1850 BCE, where it was applied directly onto wounds, similarly to how it is used today. Silver-containing wound dressings, or SCWDs, use their properties to inhibit and or repress bacterial growth when the silver is in its soluble form of Ag+ or Ag0. Ag0 is a silver nanocrystal, which is a cluster of silver ions. The various dressings are created and then impregnated with Ag+ ions, which are then released after making contact with the biofilm on a wound. After making contact with said biofilm, the silver aids in the healing process of the wound. Some of the dressings tested contain different makeups and materials from one another, such as hydrofibers, foam pads, and varied levels of silver. As mentioned previously, each of the compared SCWDs have different structures and materials, and therefore, I would like to point out that ActiCoat Flex 3 isn't just made of Ag+ ions. It is made of silver nanocrystals, which again are clusters of silver ions. Prior SCWDs provided a quick initial load of silver ions, which will deplete relatively quickly when in contact with the biofilm on a wound. Current novel SCWDs are designed to release a slow and steady supply of silver ions, which would subsequently be consumed far less rapidly. ActiCoat's Ag0 silver nanoclusters do exactly that. They release a slow and steady supply of silver, and when they contact the biofilm on a wound, they become inactivated far less rapidly. Our study aimed to determine and compare the efficacy of 7 different SCWDs in an in vitro wound model. We hypothesized that since each SCWD is made up of different materials and components, then their effects on the bacteria should vary from one another. In our study, we used a standard assay to examine the effectiveness of the various SCWDs' ability to inhibit and or repress bacterial growth against 2 strains of bacteria, Escherichia coli and Staphylococcus aureus, which are both commonly found in wounds. Bacteria were grown for 6 hours and then applied to the surface of agar with the embedded SCWDs and incubated at 37 Celsius. After around 18 hours, we observed the zones of inhibition and or repression around each dressing and then compared them to one another through an ANOVA analysis. I would like to point out that in our study, we described the zone of inhibition as the zone of no bacterial growth around each dressing, which you can see, and the zone of repression as the zone of slow bacterial growth, which is the second zone that you can see around the dressing. Now, focusing on panel A, I would like to remind you all that throughout this study, we classified the zone of inhibition as the zone of no bacterial growth, which is what we'll be taking a look at currently. Now in panel B, we are comparing each of the 7 dressings and their inhibitory effects on E. coli. I would like to point out that the red bar is that mean or average area of zone of inhibition for each dressing, and the greater that average or greater the mean, the greater the effectiveness. So as you can see, ActiCoat Flex 3 showed the greatest inhibitory effects on E. coli, with MaxOR2 AG close behind it. Additionally, Optifoam showed very weak inhibitory properties on the strain of bacteria, and as well as Mepilex that showed little to no inhibitory effects. Similarly, in panel C, we are comparing the inhibitory effects of the 7 dressings, however this time on S aureus. And again, ActiCoat Flex 3 showed the greatest inhibitory properties, with MaxOR2 AG leading close behind it, and Optifoam and Mepilex AG showed negligible inhibitory effects on the strain of bacteria. Now, while taking a closer look at panel A again, I would like to remind you all that in this study, we classified the zone of repression as the zone of slow bacterial growth around each dressing. Now, in panel B, we are comparing the repressive effects of the 7 dressings, however this time, the repressive effects of the 7 dressings. And interestingly enough, Mepilex AG showed the greatest repressive effects when compared to the other dressings, and ActiCoat Flex 3 led close behind it. Additionally, Optifoam showed very weak repressive effects, such as before. Now in panel C, we are again comparing the repressive effects, however this time on S or S. And again, Mepilex AG showed the greatest repressive effect, with Acticoat Flex 3 moderately behind it, and Optifoam with the lowest repressive effect. Now, in order to summarize and simplify the information given in the previous graphs, we created a semi-quantitative table. Each dressing was given a score through an unbiased analysis, where each plus acts as 1 point. Acticoat, which performed the best across all conditions, received a score of, therefore received the greatest score. I would like to mention that Maxor 2 AG and Mepitel AG also performed moderately well, however to a lesser extent than Acticoat Flex 3. Additionally, I would like to point out that even though Mepilex expressed a lower inhibitory effect on the 2 strains of bacteria, it did however show a strong repressive effect on the 2 strains. And lastly, Optifoam performed the worst across all conditions and therefore received the lowest score. The final conclusions were drawn with respect to the data gathered throughout the study. Acticoat expressed the greatest antibacterial properties and outperformed the other SCWDs. Additionally, Maxor 2 AG and Mepitel AG were generally effective across conditions, however to a lesser extent than Acticoat Flex 3 was. Mepilex AG, which showed little inhibitory effects, did however show strong repressive effects when tested on the 2 strains. Also, when tested across conditions, Optifoam was most effective across all conditions. And lastly, I would like to emphasize that Acticoat with its AG0 nanocrystals performed the best across all conditions. Finally, I would like to acknowledge Joel Grunhut and Dr. Nir Hus from the Florida Atlantic University Charles E. Schmidt College of Medicine. I would also like to acknowledge Ricardo Froster from the UCLA David Geffen School of Medicine and from Colleges. Thank you to each of you for your guidance and support. Lastly, I would like to thank all of you for your attention and for listening, and if you have any questions, now would be the perfect time to ask.